Today, list comprehension versus map in Python 3. We're going to look at some examples. We're going to look at the pros and cons of each, the history of how they got into the language, and even speed and efficiency at the end. So we're going to go through all of that, and we're going to start at the beginning with this list here, and this variable a representing a list 1, 2, 3, 4. And so let's say we wanted to multiply every number by 2 and return that result. So we had a list 2, 4, 6, 8. Well, if we did a list comprehension, then we would do x times 2 for x in a. And we return that 2, 4, 6, 8. Perfect. Now, what would that look like with map and the map function? Well, since we don't have a built-in, taking a step back, you need a function and a list. So those are the two arguments, or an iterable. So we need a function and we need an iterable. So our iterable in this case is going to be a, and our function, since we don't have a built-in one to accomplish this, we're going to have to use a lambda. So we'll do lambda x times 2, and that returns a map object, which is an iterator. And we can just wrap that in a list to get a more readable result, 2, 4, 6, 8. So there are the two ways that you could multiply your list using a traditional list comprehension or using list plus map plus lambda. And of course, the more Pythonic way, the preferred way, the recommended way would be to use a list comprehension. Honestly, you could probably just, as a Python developer, go without learning map and you'll be fine. But we'll compare the differences of the two in this video. And maybe if you like functional programming, if you're coming from the JavaScript world perhaps, you're going to learn about the map function. So before we go any further, let's actually look at the history of the map function and how it made it into Python. So here's a famous article by Guido, the creator of Python, from 2005. Okay? And he basically outlines that he doesn't really like the map function. So speaking about lambda, reduce, filter, and map, the functional programming functions in Python, he said that they should be cut from Python 2 or Python 3. Again, this is 2005. This is the Python 2 world, and they're kind of getting ready for Python 3. And he wants to cut it. And he thinks doing so would actually be pretty uncontroversial. So why is that? He thinks that map is just better accomplished with a list comprehension, and f here represents a function that you would just wrap around x, okay? That you would just wrap around your variable. He also talks about filter, and I'll do a filter video specifically, but just know that one of the benefits of using a list comprehension is you can do this here on the right. You see how it says if px? So that's a nice filter that's just built in very cleanly to the list comprehension. And otherwise, if you were going to use map and filter together, if you're going to chain them, I'll show you what that looks like in this video. It's longer, it looks kind of ugly. So basically, when we learn about the map function in this video, just come from the lens of, okay, it's more Pythonic to use list comprehensions, but let's just see what map's all about and if it has some benefits in one way or another, okay? So next, I just want to show you one more article. We'll clean up our Python shell, and this article is the documentation for the release of Python 3. So again, this is by Guido, and this is in 2009, so 4 years later than that reduce article. Again, this is the release of Python 3, and early on in the documentation, they talk about what's different in Python 3, so Python 2 compared to Python 3. And one of the differences is that some of these functions, map and filter, are now going to return iterators instead of lists. And it goes on to explain that if you need a list, then you can wrap list around map, as we've done in this video. But a better fix is just to use the list comprehension, especially when you need to use lambda. So again, Guido in the official documentation on Python 3 says just use the list comprehension. You don't need to use map, especially if there's a lambda. So basically saying if you're using map with a lambda, as we've done, that's kind of a code smell. That shows that's just something that shouldn't really be happening. Use a list comprehension there. If you're going to use map, then you should be using a function, not the lambda. All right, that's enough documentation. Next, I just wanted to show you in Python 2 what the good old days used to look like. So let's say we did map, and again, the syntax is your function and then your list or your iterable. And so let's just say I'll use the string built-in function, and I'll use a little list here that I'll just write up on the fly. And look at that, it's returning a list where every integer has been converted to a string. But more importantly, the type that's being returned is a list. It's not that map object. So let's do the same thing in Python 3. I'll actually even just copy paste it because I'm a little lazy, and I'll clean this up too. So we'll copy paste this, and we're going to get that map object. So again, we have to wrap list around it just to get a result, that 1, 2, 3, 4. So again, in Python 2, you used to get that result directly, and now you're going to get a map object. So that's kind of a pro and con as well, right? Compared to just using a list comprehension. If we did a list comprehension, it would just work out of the box. So we would do string x for x in 1, 2, 3, 4, and just returns it out of the box. I didn't have to wrap list around it. So there's the map versus the string comprehension. There's the map versus the list comprehension. Next, I wanted to show you real quick what I was talking about regarding filtering. So we'll clean this up, and we'll run this again. And what if we didn't want every single number to pass that function? What if we just wanted to do 2, 3, 4? So we could do if x greater than 1. And when we return this, we get 2, 3, 4. So it filtered those numbers out of there. So what if I had to do that same thing with the map function? How are we going to chain map and filter together? Well, I'll do it for you. So we'll put filter on the outside, and again, we need a function, and then we need an iterable. So this map stuff, that's going to be our iterable, that's going to be our second argument, and our first argument is going to be, it's going to be that lambda. So we do lambda x greater than 1, map, and I probably need to add one more thing around there, string and int. Okay, so let me just do this with int. Okay, so 2, 3, 4. So basically it's just iterating and turning the int into an int again, obviously not doing anything, but what's important here is that we have our lambda and we are filtering. So we're comparing our lambda filtering method versus our list comprehension method with if to the right. So if you do want to filter using map, you have to use filter plus lambda or filter plus your function. So just chaining those methods together versus kind of just getting it out of the box with a list comprehension. Next, I wanted to go back to our original example where we're multiplying our list items by 2. And the way we're doing this is without a function specifically for that purpose. We're just multiplying things by 2 on the fly. And we have to use lambda here. We have to handle it manually. But what if we created a function to do it for us? So we could do something called times 2, and that'll take a number. And then we will return ix2, and that should be good to go. And then when we throw this into our list comprehension, we just wrap it around our variable, times 2. This should be x. And when we run this, it's multiplying everything by 2, and it's going through the function to do that. And if we wanted to do that same thing with our map, then we can just rip out this whole lambda thing, and now this is going to be much cleaner. I just have to write the word times 2, and that works again. So there's actually kind of 4 ways that we could have done the times 2 exercise. 2 ways using functions, and then 2 ways just writing it out manually, right? So those are kind of the 4 ways that we could have reached our result of multiplying the items in our list by 2. So we could have done it the good old-fashioned way, doing times 2 using the lambda, or we could use the newer way using the function that we created just above and having having the function do the multiplying for us, okay? So this compared to this. And so why this is important is because when it comes to map, that's what they say, is that if you're going to use map, make sure that you're using a function. Never use map with lambda. But if you're using map with a function that you already have, it's a little bit more acceptable, and from a speed perspective, it might even be faster. So what we're going to do next is look at the speed of these things and see how that goes. So we're going to use the Timeit library to check out some of these results. So you can write from Timeit import Timeit to do the same thing, to use the Timeit library. And we're going to paste in a function here. So we have our times2 function, and we have a list with just 1, 2, 3, and we have to import that function so we have access to it. We run this, we get a number, we get how long it took to run that function. And if we did the same thing with a lambda, then we can try that out too. So it's lambda x times 2. And when we run that, it was longer. So it took more time to do the same exercise with lambda compared to just a function that we created. So again, coming back to what Guido said and the Pythonic way of doing things, map and lambda is something that you want to avoid, and here we can clearly see that it's slower. Next, let's do a little bit of comparison of map versus list comprehension from a speed perspective. So let's say we had our map lambda, or actually more importantly, let's do map times 2, because that's the one they said, okay, if you're going to use map, you can do it with the function. So this is the one that we want to check out, map times 2. So it's about 0.20. And actually, to be fair, what you would have to do is wrap this in a list to be comparing apples to apples with a list comprehension, if ultimately what you want is a list. And that's going to make it way slow. So I think a list comprehension is going to come in probably somewhere in the middle, but we'll see. So I'm going to do this a little bit manually here, and we're going to do x times 2 for x in 1, 2, 3. Okay, and so that took 0.3. So that took longer than the lambda way even. Now let's see what would happen if we use our times2 function. So we wrap times 2 around x, run that again, and 0.57. So it was actually in a list comprehension slower to use the function than to just do it straight up. And we can run this again. And so we found with a list comprehension, it was faster to do things without a function. But when it came to map, we found it quicker to do things with a function. So at least in this case, map seems to be quicker than a list comprehension. I've seen arguments that when you start using real numbers, like big numbers at scale, that trend reverses and list comprehension is faster. But if you're working with small numbers from a speed perspective, using the map function could be more efficient than using list comprehension. Worth mentioning though, even though map is faster, if we had to convert that to a list, that's going to make it way slower and remove all of the gains. I also wanted to mention that the reason that I did that I imported the function on the list comprehension, even though I didn't need to up here, was just to make it kind of more apples and apples between map and the list comprehension. But I'm guessing that if I remove this import that we don't need at all, it'll probably make things a little bit faster. And so do with this information what you will. This isn't like a super scientific speed test, but just know that there's trade-offs to all your decisions around, wrapping things in lists or using a function versus not. All of these decisions have implications from a speed perspective. I think the last thing I wanted to mention was just this article, and just this thought I had was, why does map even return a map object instead of a list in Python 3? Like, what advantage is there, or why do they decide to do this to begin with? And this is the result I found, and it's really not what I was expecting. But it said the reason why map exists at all when we could use a generator expression is that it can take multiple arguments as a function, basically. So here we're actually using two different lists, and we could mess with this a little bit. What's important is the shorter of the two lists, and we could even add another one. So we could do three lists, have two numbers here, and then we need the shortest of the three lists. And so that's why the result only returns 2. But basically, the map function can take multiple iterables as arguments, and this could be useful to you in your using of the map function. The Stack Overflow answer also talks about generator expressions, which I didn't mention too much in this video, but basically if I had my list comprehension, worth noting that this list comprehension, if we just wrap it in this other type of bracket, kind of forget what they're called, but do it like that, then we have a generator object. So maybe when you're comparing list comprehensions and map, maybe a true comparison needs to be done between all three. So generators, list comprehensions, and map, and generators have a use case as well. I might even do a full video on generators versus list comprehensions in the future. So I think now would be a good time to wrap up. So what did we learn today? Basically, just use a list comprehension unless you really like map for some reason. And if you do have to use map, do not use it with lambda. Make sure you're using a real function as that first argument, not lambda. If you find yourself using lambda, just use a list comprehension. There's also other benefits of list comprehensions, including the ability to filter, the fact that it returns a list straight up instead of a map object, and differences from a speed perspective. So just a couple things to note. Other than that, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.